You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. And this episode is a special episode in that you can look forward to not having to listen to me, which I think is a very special treat for the winter solstice. That's right, I was not on this episode. My dear friends stepped in to take over and get together to put an episode into the ether. Those dear friends, of course, are Trae, the co-host, who you hear every episode on Cemetery Confessions. My dear friend Azy. You can find them at Obscura Undead, which is a website, a YouTube channel that produces all kinds of content about new music. You can find DJ mixes. They have a series of compilations they've released, and a new one is coming out soon as well. And occasionally they will do zines and that kind of thing, which is incredible. They collaborate with other creators, and if you haven't checked them out yet, definitely do that. And then also my other dear friend, Ryan, who is the lead singer of and lyricist of Witch Hands, along with his new project called Circumverser. And both of those bands are fantastic and should absolutely be in your rotation of goth music. So here we are. I am in the same boat as you. I can't intro this episode because I have not heard it yet. I assume there's going to be a lot of ADHD tangents and at least one or maybe two comments about goth. So I think maybe take my hand and we will go on a journey together, and I will meet you on the other side.
Greetings, Cemetery Confession Crypt. You've probably already gotten your introduction for Danny, but you have some surrogate Dannys today. You have me, Azy, who you may have heard on here before. I run Obscura Undead, which is a new music outlet, and all around, I'm just a spooky nerd. Other surrogate Danny, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, me?
Yes.
I assumed it would be the regular co-host
of
Cemetery Confessions.
Trae is Trae. Trae is no surrogate Danny. Trae is Trae.
Oh, that's fair. All right. I guess I'll be the Danny surrogate. Hello. I'm Ryan Flint. I'm from Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm the host of Witch Hands and Circumverser and
the
goth store, The Arbitrarian. Well, I'm trying to be a surrogate Danny.
Oh, I see.
Yes. Anyway, I've been on the podcast before. We did 4 hours together with Danny on old albums and talked about how pick scrapes drive everyone but me crazy.
Oh, God, I hate them.
And now we're here to end the year for Cemetery Confessions.
Yes.
See it off. Rehash every subject. What is goth? Is it stale? Is Andrew Eldritch goth? Is he not? Does that make him more goth? Is it just a fashion-based subculture? Has he been freshly preserved?
Right. Is that fog, or is it the mist from cryopreservation every time they have to wheel him on stage?
I mean, I'm going to go with he's not well preserved. I saw a meme about his twink death recently, and I was like, man, stay off that white horse, boys.
I don't know how to unpack that, Trae.
It's best not.
For the most part, yeah, I'd say just keep it at arm's distance and try not to make eye contact.
Like he himself.
Yes.
That's how we'd want it.
All right. Anyway. And of course, I'm Trae. You all know me, the regular co-host. Well, those of you who this isn't your first episode. But yeah,
rodeo.
The regular co-host for the last several years of this delightful podcast that we all love making and bringing out to you all.
Yeah, I'm like casserole at Thanksgiving.
Full of green
Well, as
beans.
somebody from the Midwest, that's like the core of Thanksgiving. So
I know.
I mean, that makes
Also
you pretty central.
Also from the Midwest, and I'm casseroled out. I don't want those like little crunchy bits on top. No more, fried
No
onions from
Funyuns?
a bag. No. Oh, I could do without another casserole.
You've been away from the Midwest for too long.
Oh, well, I could expound.
Maybe you just haven't met the right hot dish.
Oh, God.
Oh, geez.
It's okay. My grandmother's from like the Dakotas.
Yeah.
Don't you know the Dakotas?
Yeah, it was weird hearing her and my uncle say a bunch of racist shit in their cute Midwestern accents as a kid.
Oh, yes. Isn't it fun when folksy people get all racist?
Oh, yeah, it's Fargo, but the wood chipper is casual racism.
Uh-huh.
It just makes me glad that humans are mortal and society moves on. Anyway,
yeah,
this is going to be a very ADHD episode. We prepared really poorly. We have opinions.
That's not true. We prepared well. It's just that some of us, me and Ryan, aren't so good at structure.
That's fair. I'll try to wrangle things in. That's usually Danny's domain, though I have every once in a while do bring us back on track on the regular episodes as well. So why don't we get to that article? I think you said article, that post.
Yes.
You said you brought it up. If you want to go ahead and read that, and we can just use that to sort of center our discussion.
So I can start this out, and yeah, I think Ryan's right, because you never know if this is going to be someone's first episode, because you always want to be reaching new earballs.
Mm-hmm.
They earballs some more.
You're a quivering earbulb.
You know, Shakespeare invented the word eyeball because there wasn't a word for eyeball.
It wouldn't necessarily surprise me. Shakespeare invented a lot of words.
Yeah. There was a good post in Sounds and Shadows yesterday where someone was just like, has goth music hit rock bottom?
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Let's talk about it. I think my role on this episode is going to be like, please explain that to me.
That's
I will
fine.
be the stand-in for the audience.
Perfect. We need more of those because we definitely have plenty of audiences that are when Danny goes off on one of their academic tangents.
Yeah.
digging up ontologies and stuff. They're like, well, we'll just sort of roll with it.
I haven't
Wikipedia
read all
at the same
academia.
time. I was thinking of starting off with, maybe we can just get a feel for what all of us think of the state of goth today and where we see it going and what we see as maybe concerns or positives in it. And then we can use that to dovetail in, maybe with that article you mentioned that unfortunately I haven't read yet, so I'm not familiar with what it's discussing. But
it's a post in Sounds and Shadows.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know what they were talking about, but it sounds like the same thing we talk about in this subculture every 5-10 years about catastrophizing about how the sky's falling.
Yeah.
Or has gone out, maybe.
Yes. The basic premise is that, are people just putting out what they think the audience wants to hear and no one's taking any risks? And my take on it was just like, yes, and also no. Yes, in the sense that like this always happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a thing. It happens in every single like creative environment. Sometimes because of mass media commercialization, sometimes just because someone wants to live their rock star dream, so drives the sound that made someone else famous into the ground.
Or that made themselves famous too.
Yeah, true. And then the no side was like, no, you're always going to have people like dissatisfied and doing weird shit. And eventually enough people like coalesce around a certain like innovation or new sound. And they just, get out of the hole and then go dig themselves a new one.
Yeah. And there's also the fact that, when you hear about things, you hear about stuff that strikes a chord with people. And sometimes that's just the mass group of the subculture wants to hear the same thing, so they'll only talk about stuff that reminds them of the 90s or the 80s or whatever. And those people who aren't engaged with that get sick of that, but that's all they're hearing, so that's all they assume exists out there. But the other stuff exists. There's people experimenting, but they're just not getting any attention because the attention is being directed at what's triggering the current subcultural zeitgeist.
Right. And I have more to say on that, but that's basically the idea, and I think we can expound for quite some time on that.
Well, now's the time.
And
unless you want to read the post, since people aren't necessarily in that group and can't see it.
I can do that. Oh, I just opened up Facebook, and the first post is, "I'm getting real tired of hearing cookie cutter shit that sucks."
Hey, look at that. Perpetual complaints.
What I think is funny is I've been bitching about this for years, and now people are just like, meh, and I'm just like, I understand. It's because I listen to a lot more music than I think the average goth does.
I don't usually have that problem. I mean, I see cookie cutter shit, but there's plenty of other stuff out there, so I just don't pay that much attention to it. But if you live in your little algorithm bubble within your Spotify recommended list, you're going to get stuck in that rut because that's what they do.
The algorithm thinks you like.
Yeah, they glom onto the thing that seems to have you staying on their platform, and they just hammer that through you because they think that's going to just stick you there permanently. And for probably the majority of people that works, which is why the algorithms are designed that way. But for others, that totally turns us off.
Mm-hmm. All right. I am scrolling down to try to find the post. Maybe if I go through my notifications. Fun little encounter today explaining to someone why Cleopatra is also a shit record label.
Actually heard something from Rose Garden Funeral Party when they were shopping their album around. They said they didn't think they'd get much support from Cleopatra.
Cleopatra gives their artists absolutely zero support and incredibly restrictive contracts.
Yeah. So they're like the Suicide Girls of music.
There's a blast from the past.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a deep cut.
It's still going somehow.
I believe it. I just haven't seen anything from that site or about that site in a hot minute.
Also, all the naked ladies have tattoos and piercings nowadays.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so Suicide Girls isn't really that novel and special anymore.
Yeah.
So when do we get to that article? I think you said article, that post.
Yes.
You said you brought it up. If you want to go ahead and read that, and we can just use that to sort of center our discussion.
Absolutely. So, like Ryan said, we're going to be talking about the state of the goth scene right now and it moving into the future. And we decided this topic, a bit back, but recently in the Sounds and Shadows, shout out to Ken for running a lovely Facebook group. There was a post from, I don't know how to pronounce the squiggle bee, but an Axel about has the scene hit rock bottom creatively. And so I just want to read through some of that, possibly all of it, and we'll talk about it because, that is a good question. All right, so let's get started. I recently had an interesting discussion with musician friends, and we came up with the topic of creativity in the gothic/darkwave scene, especially when it comes to music. One thesis in this discussion was that the scene is getting closer and closer to the mechanics of the mainstream. Is that true? And the context that they provided was in German pop radio, the concept of listenability has been around for years. This means that music must neither stand out, nor offend, nor disturb. It should remain in the background. It is also the concept on which the Spotify algorithm is heavily based. Just no long intros, no real instruments. The voices must not fall out of line with expectations. And he continues to say, and after this next paragraph, we'll talk about it. In a way, I also recognize these mechanics in the scene. Sure, there are still real instruments here, but my feeling is that many bands and musicians don't dare to break out of the established expectations, in quotes. Be it vocals, lyrics, instrumentation, or the mood of an album. All in all, the result is a mass that sounds very much the same and perhaps only differs in nuances.
This is actually not my original opinion. It's Ken, the moderator of that group and singer of Amaranth. Super sweet guy. When I've seen him address this evergreen topic,
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be.
He's talked about how in the 80s and 90s, I think it was Ken. Oh no, I'm already into it. He's talked about how Cleopatra and other major record labels, when that was the only way to get ahead in the music industry, basically curated what we all heard. And that created a certain sameness and stomped out any competition because business.
Business.
And you could make an argument that if you were trying to get on MTV or something, that a corporate board and a few tastemakers and a label or MTV or whatever were going to shape anything you were able to see, unless you were deep within a tape trading scene or underground music scene. So
yeah.
Yep. I mean, I know that with The Cure, and I think this happened to Specimen and Susie and the Banshees as well. Like, they dropped their labels because the label was just like, this isn't marketable, do something else. And they're like, fuck you, this is our creativity.
I mean, I've heard that complaint from pretty much any band I've ever seen do long form interviews regarding their experience with the music industry. There's a reason it's called industry and not, hippy dippy creative endeavor. It wants to manufacture a product, and it's good to be consistent and reliable and all of that to make a effective product rather than an artistic creation. So, I mean, there's always been, since the beginning of, well, probably any sort of audio musical performance that had any sort of money changing hands. So probably predating even recorded sound, where there was forces that wanted music to sound a very specific way to attract the moneyed public versus those who are interested in it as a form of self-expression and want to hear things or to produce things that are different and are self-expressive rather than fitting some sort of a commercialized mold. It's a constant tension.
You can get way into the weeds on that with publishing rights, because all of the publishing rights used to directly pertain to sheet music before recorded stuff, but when they started recording, they split this American folky music that had been just kind of one phenomenon into the white side and the black side, and you kind of got blues and
love
country,
race records,
and then you got a bunch of white people re-recording more acceptable versions of all the black people's songs.
Elvis,
Pat Boone, nothing like hearing Pat Boone do Tutti Frutti, a song about a gay queen's butt sex in the whitest terms possible.
And Trae, you're right. This does predate recorded sound, because if you read some of the early music critics, when would this have been? End of the 1800s. They constantly complain about how all composers are now just like writing in this acceptable orchestral style.
Yep. Yeah, that was same sort of movement that happened there that's happening right now in the stodgy, or at least what we consider now the stodgy world of classical music. It's ebbs and flows of people complaining about it all being the same, and then somebody does something outlandish and people riot about it being so outlandish and out of the norm and not right, and then that becomes the norm and we move on, and the cycle repeats over and over and over again.
Lots of myths about the Stravinsky Rites of Spring riots were then lauded and applauded the next year they performed it again.
Yep, that's usually the big touchstone for the edginess of classical music as it was historically played. The Paris riot at the premiere.
You go into more detail about that? I have never heard of that.
Oh, you didn't watch Trae's video?
I did not. I told you I didn't prepare.
There's a great video on YouTube about wildness in music. Take it away, Trae.
Sure. I mean, I don't necessarily have a prepared statement of it describing that, but basically, when Stravinsky wrote The Rite of Spring, and more importantly, it's actually the staging of it, because it's for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a ballet, so both music and dance, and both of those musical styles, he was being very avant-garde with the musical. The music that was backing the ballet, as well as the style of dance, were very different from the norm. This was in the, I want to say mid 1800s, not 18th century, 1800s to 19th century, where we were coming out of sort of the Romantic era. So you've got your Debussy and Chopin and stuff like that, which was certainly experimental compared to the older classical stuff, your Mozartian, Beethoven style. But was still very tied to concepts of tonality, so major and minor and key centers and stuff like that. So if something was in the key of C, it was in the key of C. There was no real, there might be some movement to other keys, but they were progressed in a regular manner, nothing shocking, nothing surprising. And then this Rite of Spring came out, which started playing with really the focus of a lot of Stravinsky's writing is more rhythmic and less focused on melody and harmony in the strict sense. So there's a lot of sort of atonalist bursts of sound in sort of a free rhythmic sense. From today's ears and today's standpoints, it still does sound probably pretty, it's still classical music. So it's not anything that's going to shock someone who's listening to Gorguts or is a little bit more avant-garde now, or some noise rock. It's nothing compared to that. But it definitely, if you are familiar with classical music, it still sticks out as something odd. And then
in Fantasia,
it is in Fantasia. That's
got
true.
So accepted they put it in the dinosaur segment.
It is.
Dun 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 dun.
Yes, it does take place in that one, but it does
do
a lot of good evocations of those erupting volcanoes in that scene.
I still would like to see all of the maidens getting ready for a human sacrifice around a bonfire or whatever the Parisians freaked out about.
I mean, that is the premise of the play. The Rite of Spring is essentially a sort of a portrayal of portrayed as a folk Russian tradition of a sacrificial virgin that is basically chosen by lot and then forced to dance herself to death to assure the harvest or something along those lines. So the dance style, along with the music, also sort of leans into that more primitivist, rhythmic, primal thing and isn't the standard of ballet at the time, which was, kind of what we perceive ballet now. A bunch of very prim, put together people in tights and tutus dancing around on their tiptoes in very ethereal and sort of evocations of fairies and floating with some great powerful shows of strength and grace, but definitely not something that would be evocative of sort of primal urges, animalistic aspects of life. And this was definitely, the Rite of Spring was focusing on that sort of neo-primitivist
arm waving
thing. Yeah, not a lot of arm waving, but very, very earthy. Whereas a lot of classical ballet is supposed to be very ethereal, very disconnected from the earth. That's part of why the whole dancing on point is to sort of disconnect the dancer from being grounded in the earth and make them feel like they're floating and something angelic and ethereal. So this was definitely turning the tables on that. And the audience in the premiere, which came out in droves because it was very exciting, but then when they saw it, they were totally scandalized and shocked and like, this isn't proper music. This isn't proper dance. This is
this isn't
garbage.
Proper music. I feel like I hear that a lot on Reddit these days.
I want something new and fresh. I hate this. Why doesn't it sound like all the other stuff?
That is exactly the rub, isn't it, though? People always want something new and fresh, but not too new and fresh. They want it to sound just like the old stuff, but be somehow new and fresh at the same time.
Right.
Basically, audiences suck. They want stuff that's not possible.
Yeah, audiences are fickle. and flighty and liable to turn on a dime, because it happened in the late 80s where there was a lot of really music, like really great music that was coming out that we would listen to today and be just like, oh man, that was such good like goth rock that was coming out during that time period. But it's largely lost unless you can find a lot of the independent pressings or very small runs of these things. In-depth music does a great job of that on his YouTube channel of finding a lot of this old stuff. But at that point, the goth scene was kind of seen to have, really died down and hit rock bottom because you were just getting clones of the early 80s bands. And that's why the 90s are remembered now so fondly, is because when that newer innovation in sound, I think largely in part due to success in other genres getting imported into the goth sound, it exploded again.
Industrial everything.
Yeah. And then the 90s petered out, and then you had the death rock revival, which was extremely experimental, which incorporated a lot of different genres, like new wave, cabaret, industrial, metal, anything and everything that you could possibly come up with. There was probably a death rock band that was doing that during the death rock revival, sort of incorporating it into the sound. And then you got a bit of a lull again, and then a huge explosion of post-punk very recently, and
which everyone is now complaining about.
Which everyone exactly is now complaining about, because every single post-punk band seems to be obligated to use the same chord, and every single goth band now is obligated to have some sort of it has to sound like Fields of the Nephilim or The Mission, or have very overdone Andrew Eldritch baritone vocals.
Yeah. I usually divide them into the Twin Tribes clones and some of the rest.
Yeah, that's usually
the with perfect
one chord.
pitch. The bass lines are usually dun 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 with lots of chorus at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure Azy could name off a dozen bands that they have reviewed with that sound recently.
I could name off far more than a dozen.
I just mean in the last week.
Yes, because unfortunately, when I make my new mixes every week, I pull in as much new music as I possibly can find, and I listen to all of it, regardless of whether or not I think that I will like it. I listen to at least one track from everything I can dig up. Okay. And I think that this also serves to fatigue me faster on a lot of the tropes that sort of come out in music.
Yeah.
And as they're developing, so I started noticing this about 2 years ago, and then I got really excited during the pandemic because new music was coming out that had I'm sitting at home, I don't know what to do with myself, I need something coming out of a lot of musicians in like singles form, and then that got fairly stale, and I think that it has to do with just our extreme access to information now. So I think things cycle through much, much faster. And so that goes back to the point of this post, is have we hit a rock bottom?
Yes and no. I think whenever I'm actually able to get a couple levels below all of the top tracks of goth stuff on something like Spotify, I start finding a bunch of stuff that's pale imitations that's rightfully forgotten of whatever their contemporary sound was.
Right, and Spotify is going to push that.
Yeah. But you got to dig for the extra lame versions of that sound on Spotify. And then you have to like look to other scenes that were contemporary for what became the new sound. Like Diamanda Galas is going on the same time as all of the bands trying to sound like The Cure.
Yep.
And if I'm being completely honest with my band Witch Hands, we always got needled by the LA scene or scene stirs that were not proper death rock because we're not from LA, even though it's obviously a global phenomenon, decades
I thought everybody in
progressed.
Colorado was from California these days.
Only half. And you'll know them because they constantly tell you how much better California is. Same with the
Yeah.
Texans. It's just perennial. But so that's always been kind of interesting to get the little diss from the purists and stuff, because objectively we don't sound like 45 Grave or Christian Death or something. I think Danny said that we lean metal, which I hadn't thought about, but
You do a
I
bit.
didn't grow up with Christian Death and a bunch of the formative bands or even a lot of punk when I was a kid, but I did listen to a lot of metal and classic
Mhm.
rock. And I'm like, well, that's like a good chunk of the sound as my vocals with that background. So I guess, yeah, we do lean metal. But where I'm going with all that is it's gone slowly from a liability of we don't know what bill to put you on. You don't sound like anyone else. You don't sound like metal. Or as Radio Scarlet put it on their album, too goth for punk, too punk for goth
Yeah.
type of deal. To,
Mhm.
oh, look, somebody is doing something different. And it's still death rock or something, but it doesn't sound like anyone else. And I don't know, you hit a tipping point with enough people and you find an audience and it starts to catch on. So I
Yep.
guess the real tell of success will be imitation. Do we spawn anyone? I'm not saying we're that grand or anything, but like just
No,
being
that
bluntly honest, that's like how we think about the business side of things. And everything has to be very curated and presented for social media and everything these days. So it's definitely
absolutely
a thought.
right.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the Spotify thing. The algorithm pushes what is searched up for, what they think people want. And so if say Witch Hand starts getting pushed a lot by the algorithm, which there's no human who designed that. It's all AI. It knows what you
Mhm.
like. It has all your data. If it decides that Witch Hands is the next big thing, it's going to start pushing that to the top of the lists. And if you're at the top of the list, you're more likely to get those imitators, and then that sound explodes for a while, and kind of digs itself a new rock bottom.
I think you mean a new grave.
Yes.
I don't know. Is there bedrock beneath that grave? Are we
No, only hell. Only the
down in the
gaping
deeps
maw.
mining diamonds in Minecraft?
Are we dwarves?
Diggy diggy hole.
Play more video games.
No, I play plenty of Minecraft. I totally get your reference.
No, I'm talking to Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
Less whittly pick slides, more diggy diggy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you can't
Cool.
dig that fast, but yeah.
Well,
I mean,
my
you
bassist
can with an efficiency pick.
Yeah, they got these hard plastic ones that are honed to fine points for precision picking. If anyone ever wants to geek out about guitar shit with me, I think about guitars way more than any singer ever should.
That's fair. I can't really do that much. I'm not a huge guitar person. I'm more of a keyboardist, but
Yeah.
Button pusher.
yeah.
And drummers just hit things with sticks. That's why everyone uses a drum machine. I'm just going to throw
Less
out
violent?
stupid hot takes.
Yeah. So, like, my response to that is, I'm kind of the same mind as it's yes and no. Like, yes, in the sense that, a lot of the sounds that you're being exposed to that are being pushed at you that are, sort of at the top right now are getting absolutely run into the ground. And no, in the sense that you will always have someone at the edges of the genre or someone who's very much within the genre, but doing something different or innovative or returning to another aspect of, say, a nostalgia sound that people used to like but no one's really thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then a whole new thing will coalesce around that. They'll pick up supporters, they'll pick up, I don't know, internet traction because everything's online. And then we'll get that for like 6 months to a year. That'll get run into the ground. And then we'll get the next thing. I actually think that this is why we see so many bands adapting to this new singles market that is just music. And because, the album is dead. But with singles, it allows you to keep on track with those trends while at the same time experimenting with whatever the hell you want to do. Because if suddenly one of your singles starts popping off, maybe go back to what that one was doing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean imitate yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. That's called personal style.
Mm-hmm.
My homeboy from CCR got sued for that by his record company.
Oh yeah, no, I saw that.
Are we going back to record companies are evil?
I thought that was a given.
I know. Were we just going to complain about this more?
I don't have one, and it's definitely a love-hate. I wish they were supporting our album, and I guess the trade-off would be they're taking 80% of our, probably more like 95% of our sales to recoup costs.
Oh yeah,
marketing and parties.
You lose complete access to anything you recorded under that label.
Yep.
Huzzah! Not every label. There are a lot of really good ones out there, but there are still some in our scene that operate like a major music, record label.
Oh yeah, I mean, there are always going to be people in any scene or any industry that are at least seemingly in it just to make a quick buck, and if they can take advantage of a desperate artist who just wants some exposure and doesn't know any better when it comes to reading a contract, they'll just milk them for all they're worth. There's actually a lot of stuff about that I thought was interesting in the that I think one of you said you were going to be reading it, or you had started reading it, the book about the hardcore scene.
Oh yeah,
Ryan, you said you were reading that.
Yeah,
they had a bunch of stuff that were talking about how some of those hardcore bands were also starting labels, and some of those labels were explicitly designed about being against their business practice, being against that trope, and were trying to be very pro artist, but also those labels were then suffering because they weren't able to stay in business because they were trying to do the right thing. And unfortunately, capitalism in general doesn't always reward the right thing.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like commie talk.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, that's kind of the bread and butter of this, the hammer and sickle of this podcast, right?
Well, thank fuck Red is in the goth palette.
Aw, it is. Cemetery Comrades.
That's the album, or the not album title, episode title.
Episode title.
Wrong medium.
You're thinking too much about guitars again.
But going back to kind of what you were saying regarding this whole concept of is it hitting rock bottom? That's, I guess, you can always ask to that, based on whose aesthetic judgment, who's determining the standard that makes something an upward trend versus a downward trend. What is rock bottom? Is rock bottom, music all sounding the same, which it sounds like is what the article is here, or is rock bottom music being so experimental that nobody likes it because it doesn't have any cohesiveness and doesn't have a sound that can coalesce a fan base around, which is rock bottom. And I think there are going to be people in our subculture and probably all subcultures or all genre fandoms that would argue both sides of that argument because it's really a personal taste thing.
Yeah. It's an interesting point in favor of the aesthetics helping to unify the scene. Because I think about sometimes like we want to go back 20 years to the steampunk explosion that was a fashion and sort of literary based sort of subculture. And there were a bunch of steampunk bands, but they were all over the map. And some of them were just direct copies of each other. And then some of them were like, Dr. Steel, like kooky industrial. And some of them, sometimes people put like the Dresden Dolls in that category with their funky burlesque stuff. But then
they were like dark cabaret.
And then there's like Emily Autumn that's like much more objectively punk cabaret. I don't know. Just going off on it. But like the goth scene has that fairly recognizable spectrum of aesthetics as well as a whole bunch of musical tropes that everybody can get behind. And yet we always argue because it's always so fuzzy.
Yeah, though one could argue that that's part of what gives the lifeblood of this scene is the fact that we're all engaged enough to be arguing about this. It's when we stop arguing about the value of music that I personally, or the value of any sort of aspect of the subculture, that I would view as more the death knell of the subculture than, people complaining about something. Because the fact that you're complaining means you still care and you're still trying to find the heart of a subculture and explore that, and you're still engaged with the concept of being part of this community and helping define and allow the community to thrive. It's apathy, not this rage, that's more the thing that would terrify me as far as the survival of the subculture.
No, there's that what is it? Our Band Could Be Your Life book that I started reading on your recommendation on this very podcast. A lot of those bands in that, I guess they were calling it the underground indie scene of the 80s through the 90s, but
yeah,
most of those guys are like probably on the older end of Gen X or the younger end of the boomers. They grew up with like 50s and 60s music and self-taught themselves, and by the 80s were butting heads with their fans that had these really strong opinions about what was punk and what was hardcore and all these. I believe that is what the song Nazi Punks Fuck Off was originally written about. It was not the skinheads, but all the rule obsessed assholes in the hardcore scene. And a bunch of them were like, I'm just playing music. I'm playing rock and roll. Go fuck yourself. Don't tell me what to do. And now we have in our little punk offshoot goth scene a lot of obsession over classifying and making rules, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's fun how it's funny how so many groups and subcultures and whatnot that claim to be such a big proponent of self-expression and anarchy and DIY get very caught up in really strictly defining what is acceptable within their domain. And unfortunately, the whole idea of, it has to go against, it can't be part of the mainstream, it has to go against the mainstream, is itself a very restrictive rule. That
it's reactionary.
Yeah, it is. And basically, you're not being creative yourself. You're as beholden to the rules as someone who is making formulaic pop music. If you're purposely trying to avoid said formulaic pop music, that's just another formula.
So is it maybe some people are trying to just get a grasp on the scene because they're new to it, and so they get really into what are the rules? Like a new convert to a religion trying to apply it to everything? Or
I do think it does seem to be people who are either learning the ropes of the scene or getting into it early on that seem to be more keen on that, at least in the people that I've interacted with within the goth subculture specifically. People who've been in the scene, going to clubs, going to concerts for decades, don't seem to care that much about, you have to dress this way, you have to act this way, you have to have this attitude, you have to listen to this music. They'll embrace, I'm going to wear what I'm comfortable with. I'm going to look how I feel like looking any given time I'm out, and I'm going to enjoy whatever music I want to hear. And I'm not going to let you shame me for liking something that doesn't toe whatever the party line is. Whereas people who are still trying to find their footing, still trying to learn and discover, tend to gravitate more towards this essentialist view of it has to be this way because this is what I learned. This is what I've made in my mind of the conception of what this subculture means. And there's always a tension there. And there's definitely exceptions to both of those. There are definitely people who are just getting into it. I mean, that's some things we've complained on this episode, is people who are theoretically just getting into it for either the wrong reasons, or maybe not the wrong reasons, but they focus on one aspect of it, and thus they want to define goth as all the other things they like must be goth because they have to be goth because they want to be this one aspect. And so now this other music that they listen to, whether it's, you know, emo rap from SoundCloud or you know, whatever, that's usually not considered part of the subgenre, but that's what they like, but they still want to dress in black and still want to have the cachet of goth, so they scream from the rooftops that no, this has to be part of the goth subculture. You're being a gatekeeper if you're excluding it, because I like it and I'm goth because that's part of my identity, and I'm going to fight tooth and nail for that to remain true. And if I'm goth, everything I like must also be goth, otherwise I can't claim to be goth.
I kind of wonder just how much of that is also just developmental stages and age, because you're just getting into the goth scene, you're likely a teenager and still figuring out who you are. And right. I don't know a lot of 40-year-olds that give two shits what other people think of them. And sometimes they have been in the goth scene for ages and are fine showing up in the same Bela Lugosi shirt for 20 years, occasionally with a fishnet shirt under it, and or they just don't care and they'll show up for the opener or the headliner once or twice a year and never go dance, and that's that for them because they have to get up early for work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that creates a really interesting tug of war, because sometimes you do have the scene open up to expand and be more inclusive of more genres. Like now we say like dark scene. I see that more and more every passing year, where people refer to the dark scene more broadly to incorporate, you know, all of these people who also, you know, are into electro or industrial things that would have been hardlined out of the subculture some time ago.
Yeah.
So sometimes it does, you know, open up, but of course, for that to happen, you have to have like those two cultural spaces overlapping, which I don't think like the dark scene, at least in the sense of like goth communities, overlap too much or exist in the same spaces as like the folks who are really into, you know, mumble rap or something.
Not a lot, no. Though I think some of that has to do with some of the underlying issues when it comes to goth and race relations, which is something we still wrestle with. So especially when you're dealing with an overlap where someone from what's considered an outsider culture, a different, you know, racial culture, a different background than is the sort of stereotypical root of goth, despite, you know, goth coming from a mixing of European and Afro-Caribbean cultures in its outset, but we tend to forget about that and focus on it's a bunch of white guys doing sort of a punk offshoot from Europe. And now that they have people from other cultures and other nations and other ethnicities coming into the scene, there's always some tension there. So when something comes in that, like a mumble rap or something like that, that definitely has a very prominent association with a specific culture that is not stereotypically considered part of the gothic subculture, there's going to be some pushback against that. It's unavoidable. It's not really, doesn't make it excusable, makes it understandable, but it is something we need to probably wrestle with. And yeah, is there a place, or is there an argument to be said that sort of stylistic music is enough far afield that it could be questioned as being part of it? Maybe, but to completely and utterly discount it as a potential source of cross-pollination or interest within the subculture, a way for the subculture to evolve, embrace new sounds, things like that, I don't think that is the case. I think we need to be looking at that stuff, and I think we need to have that discussion and look at how goth as it exists has influenced that scene, and see what was it about goth style, goth aesthetic, musically, sartorially, that made people from what is considered a very separate cultural basis start to grab onto some of those tropes and ideas and mix them into their music. And why does that cross-pollination only have to go in one direction?
Well, I don't know enough to be able to speak intelligently on mumble rap or some of the newer artists that get lumped in as goth, like Ghostmane, who may or may not, take direct influence. But I am aware of at least two full-on rap hip-hop groups that directly are inspired and influenced, not just visually, but musically, by goth music. And they just get no traction. And it could be just because their music isn't good, or it could just be that the genre is so far afield of what people really want to dance to at a goth club. The most prominent one I know of is Prayers from Mexico. And at least their main guy, I don't know his name, but I've heard him talk at length about how he's influenced by Bauhaus and Joy Division, and fully represents that. He wears it on his sleeve. But I don't know anybody that likes his music, even though it's very obviously hip hop, coming from a goth who knows the so-called Mount Rushmore of goth bands, the whole canon and everything that everybody agrees on. And there's another group that really did not get any attention, which would imply to me that if there's those two, there's probably a whole lot more all over the place. Blackhearts, originally from Denver.
That one I'm not familiar with. I know Prayers.
Yeah. So same thing. I believe it was like 3 or 4 African Americans, full on band out of Denver, fully embraced and loved. Same thing. 80s classic goth music, wore it on their sleeve, sampled Bela Lugosi's Dead as obviously as a death rock band would, with that doom, doom, doom. You dig through any death rock band album, you find that riff somewhere. Same sort of thing as Prayers. Could not get any traction in the goth scene. And I think they eventually moved to LA, last I heard. But I think they have just fully leaned into the hip hop thing, because the music genre is different enough that it doesn't matter what they're sampling from. It's not catching on with the goth crowd. Sort of like, I know he's a big old piece of shit, but Marilyn Manson, total goth scenester in Florida, used to steal Mission UK tapes and was into all of it. But I think very few people, especially these days, would claim that what he was making really falls under the umbrella of goth music. Or if you want to put him there, it's like much closer to the border with shock rock or something. Like Alice Cooper.
That's always how I would classify his music, though. In his heyday, at least within the goth scenes that I was participating in, he did get some play in clubs, and people were dancing. So in the mid to late 90s, when he was at his zenith, as far as general popularity and general, visibility in the world, he was played in goth clubs, and some people liked it and some people hated it. But I mean, that's more than you could say about the stuff these days that you're talking about, your Prayers and those other, that are trying to mix, things like rap and hip hop and things like that into the goth style, and making that musical melding. Though I think that's probably easier than since Marilyn Manson was primarily sort of mixing a goth aesthetic, which with what was primarily a metal / industrial influenced sound. But those are groups that have always sort of cohabitated in those spaces. Goth and metal and industrial have been cross-pollinating for decades, pretty much since the inception of goth. There's been lots of crossover between those scenes. So that was less far afield than somebody coming from a hip hop, rap, R&B background trying to mix in with the goth styles, which, especially with the punk origins, there was, well, actually that would be interesting because there was a fair crossover between punk and hip hop early on.
Yeah, same
it's
time
kind
and
of
place.
it's kind of happening. Again, it's having a bit of a cultural resurgence. My husband is really into hip hop and punk and likes those like cusp bands, but it seems to be way more accepted on like the hip hop side than on the punk side.
I could see that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think the hip hop side of things. Well, to be fair, with the style of the way the hip hop designs its music, especially with the whole beat making thing, having a very broad taste in music is kind of key, especially if you're one who is making the beats, because that's the whole crate digger ethos.
Yep.
Is finding something that is out there and odd and different and not sort of falling back on the same tropes, because you're trying to find novel sounds to mix into the beats.
Right, because when you have a long music tradition of creative plagiarism, and you don't want to sound like everybody else, and you still want to bring that novelty, yeah, you go places that, on the surface are like, you did what?
Right.
I think the consumption mentality is fairly different too, though, because somebody is old hat in hip hop much, much faster, whereas goth is stuck in 40-year-old music to some degree.
It is. I mean, it has inflows, like I said, and always sort of, but it's almost always harkening back to something old.
Yeah.
I mean, goth itself as a subgenre has always been kind of backwards looking as far as being nostalgic aesthetics, coming from the Victorian era to the turn of the century into the 20th century.
Yeah, but musically, not so much. If you look at the art experimentation from Leeds, and you look at what was going on in the Batcave, where they just valued experimentation, like I said, like artistically, in the whole Leeds movement, and in the Batcave, like they didn't want to have the stodgy bands playing. They wanted to have someone who was doing something exciting and different and maybe just flat out weird.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was kind of one of the tensions between.
Oh, and same in New York punk.
Yeah. That's kind of the whole tension between post-punk versus punk as well, and kind of what distinguished the post-punk movements and then movements like goth and industrial that came out of the post-punk crash from its punk forebears. Was that sort of kicking against what was viewed as the sort of stodgy nostalgia of punk music, looking back to the DIY garage rock eras of the 50s and 60s, and eschewing the modern sounds of synthesizers and progressive rock and weird experimental music. That
whatever the hell Kraftwerk was doing.
Right. All that stuff that punk generally turned their nose up at, and a lot of the post-punk folks were like, no, they're making cool sounds. And my DIY stuff, I want to be able to experiment and not be stuck with a guitar, bass, drum, and a singer. And I want to mix some stuff up a little bit more here. And that definitely was grabbed onto by goth at the outset. And they were also playing with sounds and styles and stuff like that until, like all scenes do, they sort of coalesce around tropes. And, as soon as goth starts being defined by something, as the first generation of the bands, the fandom or the music press says, oh, well, this sound that we're hearing that's novel and interesting, let's find similarities, let's give it a label, let's box it up and package it and put it in the right crate at the record store so people can find it. And then it becomes a thing. And then you've got sort of the second wave goth bands, which
I
are
think that
more
that's
aping the first wave.
right. I think that that's what led to another factor that led to the sort of large explosion in sound in the 90s is that all
Mhm.
of these forerunner bands on labels who had been doing what their labels like were telling them, the industry just completely cut them off in order to focus on, like upcoming genres like grunge and hip hop.
Yep.
So you stopped having the industry dictating what it meant to be successful, and folks had to find a new way to move forward and find a new way to be successful.
Mhm. That always seems to be the ebb and flow of the music industry. Is something starts out underground, it's discovered, it becomes popular, and then everybody tries to make a buck on the popular thing by doing the same stuff until that gets sort of old and tired.
That's the
And
market
then,
cycle.
the market moves on to the new hotness. And that subculture that's been now abandoned by the market because it's no longer popular and hot is now free again to follow their muses and do something experimental and fun and interesting, and either evolve that subculture or start splintering off into new flourishings of music that become their own thing.
What I find
But yeah.
really interesting is that looking at the labels now, even though a lot of them are independent and DIY labels, you still have that sort of leveling of sound because it's that tension between what the artist wants to create and you know what the label wants to be commercially successful. Even if commercially successful in goth means you manage to sell all of the vinyl pressings.
Right. Yeah, we're not talking going triple platinum or anything, but
No.
getting
Go back
some play. It's good.
We can go back to the Batcave example for a second, though.
Mhm.
Again, with patterns of like consumption in a scene, not just the Batcave was really open to all sorts of different stuff coming through.
Mhm.
I think Britain's music scene in general has a lot of, because of colonialism, has a lot of
Yes.
just direct pipeline from the Caribbean, not to mention the main continent of Europe. Lots of
Mhm.
different stuff, even from the Eastern Bloc, would trickle out now and again.
Yep.
And Andrew Eldritch has talked about how stodgy Americans are with what kind of bills they'll put together, because Sisters of Mercy would be on like dub and or directly supported or directly supporting dub and ska bands mixed in with punk and art rock and electronic and any number of things. Although he's firmly, Sisters of Mercy is a rock band, and you
Yes,
can't
they
change
are
my
a hard
mind.
rock band, and that is it, all they are.
But that's why he set up the American tour with Public Enemy,
Mhm.
because he was coming from that mentality and there was mutual admiration. And
Yeah.
yes, the American record labels chickened out because they thought there would be a race riot, which is absolutely insane. But our consumption patterns in the US really are very different. Festival lineups in Europe tend to be a lot more all over the place
Mhm.
than American ones. When I used to go to the San La Muerte Fest before the pandemic, that was a 3-day festival, and that was always divided up genre wise, day by day, which was kind of cool. If you don't like the more anarcho punk heavy leaning stuff, then you skip Friday. If you
Mhm.
want,
Okay.
that's actually where I saw Rose Garden Funeral Party and Twin Tribes before they
Hmm.
blew up, to drop some names, but they were, on the post punk day.
Yeah.
And then the day that had the old school headliners like Alter Defay or Death Charge or something, that might be a little more mixed just because they had prestige but a different sound. But
Do you
you know
think
what I
that's
mean?
a contribution to the, sort of leveling effect? Is that bands only play with like bands rather than, maybe shaking it up a bit?
It's possible. But my band that doesn't sound like any proper death rock band, has been on bills with metal and dark wave and post punk and all sorts of different types of goth music because we cross over a little bit with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I know me
But-
personally, I like a mixed bill. I like having my challenges, not my challenges, my expectations challenged, not my challenges expectations.
I mean, that
it
is
sounds bad.
expectationing our challenges. So
Yeah, it is.
Am I having a stroke?
Maybe. You smell
Well, my nose
toast.
doesn't work, so I guess if I do smell toast, I'm definitely
Shit.
having a stroke.
yeah, I definitely prefer. I mean, I don't necessarily go to concerts as much. I'm more of a club goer. I prefer DJ stuff because I like dancing, and I don't find dancing at a concert to be as. I don't find concerts as conducive to dancing, I guess, in general.
Oh, see, I'm a bad DJ because I'm just like, listen to all the new shit I found that's weird.
Well, right, but that's what I like when I listen to music at a club, and one of the reasons that I'm one of those people that some DJs tend to be annoyed by because they always ask, "Hey, do you have any requests?" I'm like, no, I don't have any requests. If I wanted to listen to stuff I wanted to hear that I already knew, I would stay at home and play the stuff I already have. I'm here because I want to hear what you think I should be listening to. I want to learn and discover. But having been a DJ, the vast majority of the requests you get are for the same 10 songs every week from the same people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I get it. There's something to hearing it on the big speakers, but
there is.
Oh, my local scene, I'm always digging up like random old post punk stuff that I want to dance to, or death rock or something. And usually when they play what I want to hear and will dance to, it clears the floor because a lot of Colorado goth scene stuff is stuck in hyper pop, or no, future pop, not hyper.
Okay, because
And,
hyper pop would be
I would
interesting.
be very surprised.
I would be fascinated
be-
to see hyper pop at a goth club.
Yeah, no, misspoke. Future pop, which is now past pop, and agrotech are like.
I was super
interesting.
happy to clear the dance floor when I DJ'd in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
I actually like when the DJ clears the dance floor, as long as it's something that I do want to dance to, because I like having space.
Yeah. Do the arm flails and pretend you can still have a clove on the dance floor.
See, that's why I say that like I'm a bad DJ, is because I pretty much always clear the dance floor except for like the two people who are like, oh, I've never heard this before.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also something to be said for repetition. The way that pop music is established is just pushing it on all of the outlets until the familiarity makes it catch on.
Yep, repetition legitimizes.
Yeah. It really is very hard to do that in the scene with newer music.
Yeah.
I mean, what I had some success with as a DJ was finding stuff that sounded that was more of an evolution rather than sticking something that I really love out of nowhere. But I'll play a popular song that everybody likes, and then the song I'd like them to like that's similar to that song, I'll play them back to back. And sometimes people will stay on the dance floor because it's similar enough. And then if you do that enough, they start getting used to the new thing, and the new thing can be the new Swarm song rather than the traditional one. But that's sometimes hard if the music you're trying to get them into is so different from what those popular 10 tracks everybody requests every week are.
Right. So we're looking at a multi-pronged sort of reason for why someone might feel like we are at rock bottom.
Yeah.
Because you have outside the club influences like Spotify pushing a certain sound at you. You have the club pushing a certain sound at you. You have YouTube recommendations. They do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
All of these forces that are in no way encouraging you to step out of your comfort zone and try something new. You have to actively seek that out for yourself. So if the scene is going to move on to something else, like how would we move forward? What is the future?
So you're telling me you don't want to make a Spotify style DJ list of all Twin Tribes clones to
I
keep
really
the floor
don't.
happy.
I think Spotify manages that all by itself. It doesn't need any help doing that.
But I want to hear
Yeah.
it on the big speakers. I
All
need a
of
chorus
the-
pedal.
All
Give
of
me
the
Grab
bands that
Majesty and Twin Tribes all night.
like 90% of the bands that I get really excited about because they are just doing something just really interesting,
Weird.
either from a vocal perspective, their instrumentation, their way of just composing.
Mhm.
I can't find it on Spotify. It has not been
Yeah.
distributed to Spotify.
Hmm.
That's also part of the
I-
reason why I can get it in my mixes is because it isn't copyright claimed.
Okay.
I keep dropping my mixes. It's because it's my primary way of engaging with new music, but it does have an audience. So I know that there are people out there who are really interested in listening to new sounds and who come back to my mixes frequently to discover, one or two new bands or new tracks that might have gotten buried or just never presented to them in the first place to find that specifically. I kind of see that right now the bands haven't caught up with it yet, but I am kind of starting to see a shift in the way people want to engage with the music, in that they want to have novelty.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, that's been
algorithms.
pervading the music of today in general, not just within our subculture, but I mean, look at the brief rise of the previously mentioned hyperpop, and that sort of blossoming of style, the mixing and matching of stuff happening in the hip hop scene.
Yeah.
Bringing in, crossover stuff. You had your, Old Town Road mixing rap and country, which are usually these two things can never mix and meld sort of idea, but somehow it did work.
No, there's a strong argument to be made that both of those are written entirely in Pro Tools with defaults. You can find compilations of country song mashups because they're all the same stock setting. And like really, really mainstream pop radio and hip hop is almost converging onto one genre from different directions.
And country.
From a high-end commercial perspective, I've heard multiple kids or interviewed kids talk about like they really love Billie Eilish because she sounds nothing like all the other poppy artists out there.
I mean, that's one of the things that grabbed my ear about Billie Eilish, and I'm a pretty big fan of her stuff.
Everyone likes Billie Eilish some.
I've been really intrigued by a band that my husband's been into a lot lately, and they're called Caterpillar.
I've heard that. I'll have to look them up.
You can't. You might be able to. It's like zeros and umlauts so that their band name looks like a caterpillar.
Like a witch house thing?
Kind of, but they have songs that are all over the map that just don't give two flying bats about genre. They have a song that is straight up death rock. And then they have other songs that might lean into hyperpop or into genres I don't even know, but it's nothing that I have a reference point for. And they've blown up because they don't sound like anybody else. So I do hope, because the goth scene always seems to operate in this sense that when something gets big outside of the goth scene, then it gets big in the goth scene, like, or at least that like mentality or ethos or style. It originates like from without. So it's possible that sort of mindset and ADHD drive for novelty 24/7 will move into the music, or at least the consumption of the music, because it is really starting to, I think, get more prominent within what bands are creating.
It's kind of interesting side note to think that all of these bands like in Witch House and Caterpillar and God knows how many that we can't pronounce kind of only exist online because that's the only promotion tool, and they can have those weird fucked up character names because copy paste exists.
Mhm.
That's true.
Just a side thought. So, have we
definitely-
squeezed this subject dry? Have we proved our scenester cred?
I don't know if we've proved our scenester cred because we've talked a lot about knowledge of things outside the scene, which in some circles means we're
It's
not real
underground.
goths.
You haven't heard of it because it's not goth.
Yeah,
And
but we've
everyone knows
cred
not
dropped enough to
goth.
save ourselves.
Yeah, but everyone knows not being goth is the first step to being uber goth.
It's important, yeah.
Yeah.
The not a goth is one of the main goth archetypes.
Which is what I'm saying. We've proved our cred. We're
Yes.
so goth, we're not goth.
So, if either of you had to identify something that, you think is going to kind of get really big as like the next thing in the goth
Oh
sound,
God.
what would you put on your dream board?
I would really, since we're always, as artists, always stealing, borrowing, recombining, taking influence, if you want to put it nicely. And goth is very sometimes stuck in the past. I would like to hear more people aping the variety of glam and gloom that Bauhaus had. Lots of different vocal styles and songwriting, and
I have yet
like
to hear a
fish
good
cakes and
Bauhaus clone.
yeah, me too. I mean, there is definitely something to be said for the unique chemistry and time and place and everything of those guys, but they had a band like Black Sabbath. Almost every one of their major songs spawned like a metal subgenre or an
Yeah.
entire band's sound, just copying the one Iomi riff in a million iterations
Yeah.
and speeds.
Oh.
And I would also like to hear a credible Susie clone here and there. Actually,
There have been more of bands that have tried that than the Bauhaus clones. I haven't heard necessarily a great one, but there have definitely been a fair number of female-fronted goth bands that seem to be trying to capture that Banshee's magic.
I've
think
been hearing a lot of femme-fronted bands actually moving in a more like X-Mall direction or the March Violets direction, and I find that so intriguing.
Yeah. I think one that caught my ear and made me think of that, was a Diavol Strain, which, name drop, I also saw at the Santa Muerte Festival. So you should all like support your local or not local death rock festivals. But they're from South America. I think it is to assigned female at birth, non-binary folks. I'm not sure because there's a language barrier.
Yeah.
But great live band, rather death rocky, somewhat post-punky, and they have some tracks that you can very prominently hear Susie in the vocals and the guitars here and there, but not just a straight up knockoff. Just influence peeks out.
Yeah.
Which is
In general, I don't want to hear knockoffs.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned early on, knockoff is, it's like one of those, that's how you know you made it when you've got clones or a Weird Al cover.
And that is why Sisters of Mercy is the ultimate goth.
Yes.
They have too many goddamn clones, even though they're hard rock, and he's not goth.
It's interesting, Azy, that what you said with the whole Bauhaus thing. I hadn't really thought of it that much, but you're right. I can't think of any band that captured really much of any aspect of Bauhaus other than those aspects that kind of make
over and over.
goth, a goth idea. I've heard parodies, of course, usually of, like you said, Ryan Bela Lugosi's dead. But I think some of that is just because Bauhaus didn't necessarily have a sound you could really say this is the Bauhaus sound. They really were all over the place. It's probably one of the reasons I like them so much.
Yeah.
Is I can be in the mood for a certain kind of music and it'll just I could maybe hit that mood by picking a different Bauhaus album or even a different track on any single album.
Yeah. That's how I feel about Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds too. You can make a whole hours long playlist of like kind of sad and in love songs, or you can make a whole playlist of violent dickery cloaked in fancy words from that
Right.
band.
Or if you really want to dig deep into the biblical allegory.
Yeah.
I'd say that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds are probably more cohesive than Bauhaus on an album by album basis. So a single album is less scattershot.
I would say so.
But over their whole discography, they definitely have quite a broad range.
What about you, Trae? What
So I don't know if I can really effectively answer that question, because really the thing that I want to see in music in general is something that I can't predict. I don't if I can guess something and predict something is going to be the next big thing, I'm less interested in it, because it's like, well, yeah, that was obvious.
Right.
So I mean, I'm fascinated by weird mashups of styles and ideas, which is why I'm so frustrated when people say, "Oh, this can't be part of goth because that style of music just doesn't work with goth." So, I mean, oftentimes when I'm looking for new music, I try to think of, hey, I'm thinking about this genre of music. Has there ever been someone who did that genre of music in a goth style? That's kind of where I found jazz noir or dark jazz, which I loved.
Jazz.
The most recent thing I've been looking up, and I haven't really found anything, is I'm trying to find some like goth or dark tango.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Doesn't Jill Tracy touch on that a smidge sometimes?
A little bit. There's a couple of bands that kind of touch on it, but I'm looking for not just a track, because you've got stuff that, like, you know, okay, there's a tango that's played in an Addams Family episode, and okay, that's kind of goth and dark. And there's a handful of.
I was gonna say that's almost like Addams Family core.
It is. It is. And I mean, Addams Family was one of my first sort of inklings of the idea that I might be into goth, that well before I even knew what goth was. But I definitely was a huge Addams Family fan as, you know, as a kid, you know, even preteen, grade school era kid. I discovered the Addams Family and really loved it.
Yeah.
The old, this is before the movies too. This is the old black and white
comics.
Not the comics. I didn't get into the comics.
Oh
it was
God,
the old TV show.
You're such a poser.
I am a poser. No, the original comics I never really got into.
They're dry.
But I definitely liked the old original black and white TV series.
Yeah.
And enjoyed the movies too, because they really evoked the TV series pretty well. And Wednesday was fun.
Yeah.
For the modern evocation of it. I
It
haven't
was
seen
better
the new
than the
movie.
IHOP cartoon like thing.
Yeah, though the newer cartoon, I think, was more, the art style was really aping the comic book, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
I had not seen the cartoon other than like screenshots of it. I haven't actually watched it.
I haven't enjoyed it because I don't care for the stories they tell.
Okay, that's fair.
The stories feel more
written by ChatGPT.
A little bit, but more in line with like what mainstream audiences expect, where it's some kind of like normalization redemption arc for the weirdos.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. Which unfortunately usually leads to not being the weirdo anymore, is the redemption arc. And I don't know if that's where this one went, where the real redemption arc is kind of go on.
Oh, I was just gonna. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'll just say real quick. Sorry to keep interrupting. I think my introduction to goth people in the mainstream that were not like explicitly weirdos like the Addams Family was every TV show, especially anthology show in the 90s, had a depressed, angry kid whose redemption arc was no longer being goth.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's why I'm so like on the movies, is because it feels like a watered down version of that. Also, my like first realization of someone being a goth in a TV show was Big Bad Wolf on Campus and Merton and his hearse.
I
have no idea.
don't even. I have no idea what any
You're
of that
so
was.
underground, Azy.
No, it was I think it was on like CW or something, and
Okay.
it was this jock got bit by a werewolf, and the only person he could turn to for help was the occulty goth nerd who, drives in his beaten ass hearse.
This almost sounds like a
So-
Hanna-Barbera cartoon from the 70s.
I was going to say it sounds
it
like
was
Teen
fun.
Wolf meets Harold and Maude.
Is the
Yeah,
car haunted?
No, it was not, but
Oh.
plenty of other things were haunted. I keep thinking I want to go look that up and watch it again, but I don't know if it will stand
Always
up to my
dangerous.
nostalgia glasses.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that Beetlejuice cartoon was a rough revisit.
I hate how bad it is, but I
Yeah.
love it for being so terrible.
yeah. I watched it back when it was out, and it was fun. I strongly prefer the Beetlejuice movie, and the cartoon really kind of fucked with the characters, especially since
Immensely.
Beetlejuice and Lydia are now friends.
Their
rather
core
than
personality is just completely different.
Major problematic abusive relationship in the making until it was cut short.
And let's trade all of that for just endless wordplay puns.
Uh-huh.
I liked the commercials. They were so of that era.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I think is kind of going to be a new trend as we move forward in goth is I think that people are going to stop sort of brick walling their tracks and focus more on the interplay of instrumentation. So kind of like what Cold Wave did. I think that sort of Cold Wave ethos is kind of going to be the next thing to get us out of this quote unquote hole.
What, you think there's going to be a resurgence of dynamic range?
Gross.
I actually ran my entire music library through a dynamic rangefinder.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a lot of dynamic range once I started filtering it for like modern stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what I expect.
Okay. Yeah, if I did that filter, I was going to say mine would definitely have plenty of that, but I have a lot of classical in my music library. But if I'm filtering for modern stuff, though I do have a not insignificant amount of modern classical, it would definitely lean more towards the brick walling, though I do prefer dynamic range, and I also gravitate a lot towards dark ambient stuff, though some of that stuff can lean towards, especially the dark ambient side of things, can lead towards the noise side, which again eschews dynamic range or waves of brick walled sonic texture rather than having quiet and loud interspersed.
Right.
Like,
and a big reason why
Blue Girl.
Oh yes. A big reason why I think dynamic range is going to kind of gain a lot of traction, though, like just that specific, like what's going on in the music, rather than a particular sound or anything more composition style, is because, we're increasingly becoming isolated from like consuming goth at the club only.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a lot of us listen to music on earbuds, and you just get a wonderful experience and oftentimes unsettling experience when the sound that is rather than just completely filling your body, it's coming from one side or behind you, or just moving in space.
So now you're making me think I need to look up goth and space age bachelor pad music. the stereophonic sounds of the 50s, where they were definitely going crazy with sounds in all sorts of weird spatialization. Though right now the sort of hot thing in the music production industry is they're trying to push the whole Dolby Atmos thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is definitely not going to fly.
No.
Because you have to have that's like trying to harken back to the old hi-fi days when people were setting up special rooms with a dedicated seat in a very specifically mathematically designed position with all the speakers aimed right at it to have the optimal sound that sounds like crap if you're anywhere other than this one like 6-inch circle. And that's where the only way Atmos can really work, though they're trying to do HRTF and stuff like that make the I
think it was
to
only
simulate
Yuppies
it
doing
with
that.
It doesn't work.
with headphones, using binaural recordings and things like that. But yeah,
I'm
I
definitely
see
not
them
talking at that
pushing it.
level. I don't think that a DIY scene is going to get at that level.
Oh no, that definitely won't hit the popular thing, but that's where the sort of music production industry seems to be wanting to push everything. All these plugins are coming out, and we support Dolby Atmos, and you can now mix and have your synth in 6 different audio channels, so it can be not just left and right, but front and back and top and bottom too.
Or you can have AI convert your music to 3D sound, and it just sounds weird and like shit.
Well, that's like getting back to the whole, what was it, like the 4D, 5D, 7D audio thing that was the rage on YouTube for like a week in the mid 2000s or 2010s.
I'm glad
where all they did was took an existing track and ran it through basically like a Leslie spinning speaker, so it'd go around your head. And that was all of a sudden 7D, and it was trippy, and it was kind of fun to listen to, but it was still a stupid novelty.
Or you could go to a live music performance and
feel
the music bouncing off the walls around you.
That is such an interesting sensation.
Yeah, well, you have the sensory stuff. I'm blanking the name on too.
Synesthesia?
ASMR?
Yeah. Synesthesia.
Oh, synesthesia. Yeah. Okay.
So that's got to be an even more enhanced experience. You make your own drugs.
Yeah, no, that is why there are some genres I cannot be in the room live for. It's because they will give me a panic attack like that. Really fun to watch like agrotech band that you had when I was in Colorado Springs, where I found the music very interesting. I found the performance very interesting, but the way that the music behaved in the space, I had to go to the bathroom and like calm myself down from, verge of a panic attack.
Was that Clockwork Echo?
Yeah.
They just got all their stuff jacked in Seattle and need contributions to their GoFundMe if anyone's looking to do a good deed for a nice agrotech artist.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just FYI, go buy a Clockwork Echo album or something. Help them out.
Oh, have we officially entered Sinister Suggestions?
I mean, this is as good a point as any, I suppose.
It sounds like it. Now, is that Clockwork Echo or Clockwork Gecko?
Echo.
Okay.
It did sound like Gecko, didn't it?
It did.
It did. Enunciating has never been my strong point, which is
That's
terrible
okay. You're
as
just
a
a
front
singer.
man. Yeah. Oops.
Again, personal style.
I mean, mumble rap is in.
I also have a learning disability and love $5 words and complicated wordplay. So I've really chosen the right life path, you guys.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, I know that you had a really, really cool Sinister Suggestion.
I do. I am always trumpeting from the battlements the virtues of Batcave Productions out of Poland.
Shout out to Tomas, love you.
Yeah, if I had been prepared and not all ADHD, I would have pulled up a list of like big names of bands you've heard of.
My band is on there. No one's heard of them.
My band is on there. Nobody's heard of them.
Noctva is on there.
Why don't you just pull it up while I talk, and then we can go down the list.
Solid.
Diavol Strain, who I previously mentioned, is on there. They have just a slew of post-punk, death rock, goth,
weird
amazing
shit.
artists. Yeah. All over the map, all over the world. And Tomas basically does this, I think, out of his basement. He will talk to the artist. He will love it. He will have 200 CDs printed off. The artist keeps every bit of publishing rights and everything. And Tomas will sell these 100 CDs off of the Batcave website. And the artist gets 100 CDs to do whatever they want with.
The website is batcaveproductions.pl.
Mm-hmm.
Out of Poland. Interesting.
Yeah. And
or did they just pick that as a
no,
they are out of Poland.
Okay.
He also runs the Return to the Batcave Festival.
Yeah, which is a bucket list item for me. He also told me he just acquired a haunted mansion that they're going to turn into performance space and studio and video space. Yeah, I was like, that is the most goth awesome shit ever, dude. I love everything about this.
So Agent Sidegrinder has a release on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I believe, Alter Defay does. Alter Defay actually has several.
And their side projects, Cult Strange, also on there. Witch Hands is on there.
Angels of Liberty has a CD on there.
Mm-hmm. No, not Mulchat Doma. Are they on there? They might be on there. I don't know.
I don't know, but Ashcode is.
Yeah. It is. You're not even through the A's.
Nope. No, Tomas does a really amazing job. Belgrado, I'm at the Bees.
Yeah,
but
so I hit up Tomas and I was like, hey, it's Black Friday in America this week because we are recording on Tuesday before Thanksgiving.
Indeed.
And I was like, so this is when all the things go on sale in America.
So it's becoming a month-long thing these days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they got to get into the black somehow because luxury items are hard to afford.
Yeah.
I know this is the proprietor of the Arbitrarium. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But
Brian makes some really cool jewelry. Go check it out. Go look at it. It's really nice. I have a piece. It's wonderful and it's sturdy and I love it.
There you go. So he was like, yeah, I can't do a discount code per se, but my monthly CD subscription, where I sell off all of the extra hundreds of CDs after I sell 6 of them to the artist's friends, is how the thing stays afloat. So if you go sign up for it, which I've been on there for a couple of years, and I have stacks of amazing music I wouldn't have found or listened to otherwise. And I love just letting it live in my car for the month and playing it on repeat. If you sign up for that, cancel anytime, and it's less than $20 a month.
Yep, it's 18 euros a month.
You get a CD. And if you go into the memo field and put in Cemetery Confessions, it will send you 2 the first time.
What a deal.
I think that's pretty cool.
It is. That is really cool. That's very exciting that the podcast is getting sort of a semi shout out like that too.
I'm sure he thinks it's cool his label is getting a shout out because goddamn, what a gold mine.
Absolutely.
Does not get enough attention in my opinion.
No. He is just absolutely wonderful to work with.
Great.
There is a Colorado-ish based podcast that I've been listening to for like 10 years called Werewolf Radar, which is not goth, but it's a paranormal preparedness podcast. And it's like 3 comedians riffing on the ridiculous news of the week or talking about cryptids and mythical creatures and ridiculous historical tales, and they definitely fall on the skeptical side of it because nobody likes a con man, but they are hilarious and varied and ridiculous, and I think put out a few short episodes a week, so very fun to consume. Once upon a time it was a live show, which can't get now, but you should go check out Werewolf Radar on YouTube and all the podcast platforms because they're nice guys and silly.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So those are my sinister suggestions. Get CDs every month and be prepared against werewolves and yokai and whatever ridiculousness they dig up this week.
My sinister suggestion is entirely self-serving.
Do it.
That's okay.
Yeah. So
you doing this for free? No.
So my sinister suggestion is Obscura Undead every year does a comp series. We are on our 5th year. The comp is called Unobscured, and the premise of the comp is that we send out a submissions request just to whoever wants to submit music that is in the, more like centralized dark scene genres, but we always have a couple oddballs that we throw on. But it's music that was released in the past year. So Volume 5 is encompassing 2023. So if you are in a band or know someone in a band that you don't mind just harassing, you can have them send music for consideration for this comp to unobscured UNOBSCURED comp COMP We just need a link to the file, something saying that you want to participate, and a link to the Bandcamp where the music can be found. And this year, though, we are having a committee of 5 people voting on what gets included in the final track list. And these 5 people are DJs and musicians who specialize in various dark scene genres. So it's not just a bunch of, death rockers sitting around judging everybody else's music. We have a wide variety of genres that are beloved by all of the people who are on the voting committee. And just a little... Huh?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, if you're not in Los Angeles, it's not death rock, it's sparkling goth punk. So just be clear.
Yeah. And I was going to say something else. This year is different because we do have a contract as opposed to previous years, which were always just gentleman's agreement. But we do have a contract now that stipulates that bands who are selected for inclusion on the compilation will also get individualized like PR and marketing posts from us.
Nice.
Because we're going to be
people. Come on.
Yeah, in exchange for us being able to make a couple of bucks off a track, just to pay our Bandcamp label hosting fees. Yeah.
Exploitative capitalist pig dogs. Jesus Christ.
I know.
Trying to build the scene.
I know. It's just a fun way to get new music out there. And I also get submissions from bands where I'm like, I've never heard of you and I miss this and it's great. God damn.
And speaking as somebody in a band, we love to be absolutely harangued and harassed into doing things. So please, just anyone you know in a band, tell them what to do on every platform.
Yeah,
because free advertising.
Yeah. I have a whole spreadsheet tracking system. I've never been this organized, or at least not since I left grad school. My second sinister suggestion is a book. It is called Our Hideous Progeny. It was, I think, released in February or January of 2023, and it's by C.E. McGill. It is a Frankenstein retelling where instead of, them rebuilding a human, they rebuild a plesiosaur.
Okay.
And it's stupid and it's fun.
Wait, do they build a plesiosaur out of like living animals or somehow out
well,
of
no, they're already
plesiosaur
dead
parts?
Oh no,
well, no, I mean extant
from,
species.
Yes.
Okay.
They build what the Victorians thought a plesiosaur looked like out of extant species.
All right. Is there
okay? So it's basically the Piltdown Man meets the Loch Ness Monster.
Yes.
A little bit, but it's a really, really fun read. And I recommend it. It's dumb fun.
Interesting.
He said plesiosaur. I think I pictured sea turtle feet.
No, Loch Ness Monster is theoretically a plesiosaur. Big aquatic dinosaur thing.
But if you're going to make it out of living species, I guess sea turtles are too small. whale flippers?
I mean, they've got the
I'm overthinking
flippers,
this.
so yeah,
Yeah.
you are. The
I-
with and
There
I
was
not
a
really oughta
dolphin
read it.
all
involved.
flippers.
Oh, okay. Just one. Can't have symmetry.
Just has one very small fin and one very large fin.
Lucky
Yeah.
Finn.
Unfortunately, there are no pictures in the book, so you can't see
I
the
have to use
creation.
I have to use my imagination like a sucker.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got to exercise those muscles.
Ah,
Ugh.
So much
making
work.
us read.
yeah, it's so hard. All right, so let's get to my suggestions. As usual, I'm kind of winging this one because I'm always bad at sort of collecting them. But what I kind of came up with the last minute, I sort of mentioned it earlier, but since I did do that search most recently on the whole goth tango thing, unfortunately, I haven't found anything that really truly fits that idea. But one band that I did come up with is called Cachivache Orkesta, which is pretty good. They are sometimes called tango punk. I've only listened to a couple of their albums, and I haven't really heard that much that's tango punk. But it is definitely an interesting band, and I've enjoyed some of their stuff. What it kind of describes it as on their website is the group is characterized by its undeniably creative, original, and very quote-unquote danceable style. Some call them modern buffoons. Others describe the music as communal flat groove, and both are true. I don't even know what that means. It might be a tango term. But it says El Cachivache serves up its music in a vigorous manner with a good dose of humor, mixing up overdriven traditional tango music with a post-punk look, which simultaneously frightens and attracts the tourists. Witty song introductions merged with the music, livening up already energetic performances. The band is very popular in its home city of Buenos Aires, playing around 90 concerts a year. The band has selected to perform. That's just other general stuff. Nothing really important there.
Is
But-
it like Latin Gogo Bordello?
No, it's not quite that. I feel it's really the stuff I've heard so far is still pretty standard tango with maybe a little bit of a darker edge. Some of their videos are kind of neat. So I would definitely look them up on YouTube to see some of the videos because their aesthetic in some of those is really cool. They have this great one where I think the two dancers are clothed entirely in black except for like white socks. And you could only see their feet moving as they dance because they have it, filmed in such a way that the black bodysuits in the black background make them functionally invisible on the film. So you can only tell there's a body attached to those feet when you see the body go in front of the foot. And all of a sudden you've got this black line in front of the white. And I thought that was a fascinating video. But so far what I've heard, their music is it's a modern interpretation of tango with a little bit of an edge to it, but for the most part, it's pretty traditional tango, which I still like.
I just asked Bing AI
Oh no.
for some gothic tango bands.
Uh-huh.
They gave me Gotan Project,
Yep. I was going to
Bajofondo,
mention them too. I was going to mention both of those.
and Tanghetto.
I'm not familiar with Tanghetto. Now, most of those, I think Tanghetto might also be part of I'm not sure I think there's a Nuevo Tango movement. Something like that. There's actually two terms that both basically translate to new tango, that are sort of the modern interpretation of it. Now, both Gotan Project and Bajofondo, which I like, are more mixing sort of sampling and electronic music with tango. They're like almost electronic remixes of it. And they do
Like
have a
electro
darker
swing almost?
edge. A little bit, yes. But I don't know. Electro swing, as much as I love electro swing, seems a little bit appropriative of the original style in that it's somebody taking something that's outside the culture and reappropriating it in a way or repackaging in a way to merge to modern audiences that have no association with the underlying culture.
Yeah.
Whereas these techno bands tango bands are usually within the culture. I haven't seen many people appropriating Argentinian or Uruguayan dance styles in a sort of a post-colonial American empire context. Though one could argue that tango and music in general, as it's modernly produced, is a colonial thing, since it was originally like most things, a black artistic, a black urban artistic style that was associated with the seedier elements, especially prostitution, in its origin. Of course, now it's in high society ballroom competitions.
Well, to loop it back around to the beginning of our discussion, I believe that's the cultural arc of ballet. Started off as scandalous, flashy girl music with their little tutus, and then it became high, stuffy art.
Yes.
Is the genre called Sinister Tango?
Ooh.
I've not seen Sinister Tango. I'm going to have to look that up.
Okay, that's what Bing told me.
Dark Tango.
Okay. Yeah, I've not seen Sinister Tango. I saw Tango Noir, and then also the Nuevo Tango. But yeah, Gotan Project and Bajofondo are two that I have been familiar with for several years now, before doing this most recent search. Because I've been a fan of tango as a music genre for quite a while, though when you look up tango music, with a handful of exceptions, you're dealing with it's one of those more, like a lot of things, sort of traditional, so it's kind of stuck back in the old 40s and 50s style, so you get a lot of very classical lo-fi recordings of the great masters of tango style. That it's okay and it's got the right sound, but it just doesn't grab me like the stuff that got me into it, which is getting to the tangos of seeing the Addams Family do it, or things happening in those sort of tropey spy movies where you're at the high society ball and the suave Master James Bond spy, or the scene that's coming to mind right now is from Arnold Schwarzenegger in True Lies. But those kind of tango scenes are sort of my image that got me into tango in the first place.
You may have found a completely untapped market.
It's possible, because like I said, I just started the search probably in the last week or two. And I haven't found anything. Like when I did the search for Gothic jazz, I immediately ran into the dark jazz movement, which has some very prominent bands that are definitely exactly what I was looking for. So decidedly not an untapped market, but I'm not finding anything in the sort of dark tango.
You'd probably be able to find, Bing says that it's typically associated with wicked cultured characters, so you might be able to find something in show tunes.
Oh, I'm certain I
Disney
could.
villain music. I don't know. I think goths, in a vague sense of, there are always morbid, silly weirdos in every time and place. There's got to be one that is a tango musician who wants to give it an edge. And
there's always the classic Tom Lehrer song, The Masochism Tango, which is awesome.
Oh, I love Tom Lehrer.
Yeah.
Sinister suggestion. Listen to old school Weird Al, Tom Lehrer.
Oh, yeah.
Sinister request. If anybody could recommend me death rock waltzes, I know of several. Yeah. Please send them to me.
The closest one I can think of is, they're not really that death rock, but they certainly have plenty of crossover, is the Mephisto Waltz by Mephisto Waltz.
Yeah. Well, there's also Chrysalis Waltz by oh my god, I can't remember the name. Violets. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking.
Well,
this is my first moment like that. That's not that bad.
Yeah.
Well, while you look it up, I'll piggyback on Trae's sinister suggestion for everybody. Nouvelle Vague.
Oh yes, I love Nouvelle Vague.
Bossa Nova and post-punk and 80s alternative, they do that. They do covers in Bossa Nova style, and it's sexy and awesome.
Violet Stigmata.
Oh, okay. Interesting name.
They're a French death rock band, and the other waltzes that I found in death rock tend to be French bands.
That doesn't surprise me. Waltz, technically waltz is more associated with Vienna, but it definitely has got a lot of Parisian cachet too.
Oh yeah, it's a genre that it's a sub genre that I loosely call carnival death rock.
Okay. I'm a big fan of that subgenre in general. I wasn't aware that existed, but I've I always do gravitate towards carnival music. I love myself some dark carnival style stuff. Creepy clowns.
Oh, you might really dig Castrati if you dig death rock.
I mean, if you've listened to the episode, you know I'm very mixed on death. I like
Right.
some, but I don't like all of it because I didn't come out of the punk side as much, and death rock tends to veer a little bit more towards punk, and I'm real hit and miss with punk. But I do like some death rock a fair amount. I mean, certainly I like the Godfathers. I like 45 Grave and Christian Death quite a bit. But going much further afield from that, and I'm a lot more hit and miss. The Witch Hands is awesome.
Oh, thank you.
I
I asked
high
you
praise.
ages
I had to
ago,
shout
like
that out.
what your opinion of the album was, and I never heard back. And I was like, oh well.
did listen to it. It was just a track, I think, that you posted, not a whole album.
Oh,
I think I'd have to go back to look at the thing, but I'll give you my commentary on it. I did like it, but I'm trying to remember the specifics because yeah, you're right. I never got back to you on that.
well,
And that
all
is
of
my
our
fault.
stuff is short. I think our EPs are about 10 minutes of music, and this new big fancy shiny album is 30 minutes long.
Yeah, I'll have to go give it another listen and give you my opinions of it and tell you what I hated and what I liked.
No, you can just tell me what you
What I
liked.
liked. Yeah.
I don't want to improve or have any constructive criticism from an insightful person who's familiar with the techniques of music that could actually have real insights and comparisons and recommendations. Just feed my ego.
All right, I'll feed the ego. But yeah, so for I guess my second sinister suggestion, I'll go with as I also mentioned already, the Lowell Tolhurst book, Gotha History. I just finished it. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed that sort of personal take on the history of Goth as lived through by, one of the founding members of The Cure. So they're from the beginning.
It's so
before
grounded
Goth
and
was Goth.
unpretentious.
It is. It's really good. It's really unpretentious. It's really accepting of things that are inside and outside and not, it doesn't feel like it's trying to make a walled garden about what is and isn't Goth, which makes sense given The Cure, they have their sort of Goth trilogy, but other than that, they definitely stretch their legs a lot into other things.
I'm more in the camp that he's like that because his name is LOL.
Yeah,
I'll see myself out.
They gave his full name, and it's not Lowell. I don't remember what it was, but it's a more standard name, or what we consider, I guess, a more standard name. But yeah, he definitely goes by Lowell Tolhurst, and yeah, the book was really good. It was very unpretentious, but pretty insightful. Shout out to one of our previous guests, a whole chapter with him discussing Leah Bush and her research into aging in Goth, which, we did a whole episode interview with Leah, and she was great. I actually met her when she was out here doing a presentation at Northwestern University for her dissertation on aging in Goth, and that's how I met her in person before she came on the episode. That's
really cool.
Sort of a field work that Danny sent me out on, actually, which was kind of funny. They wanted to go, but at the time they weren't able to make it out there. So said, hey, go to Northwestern and, meet up with Leah. And so we had a great conversation. She's great. I love her, but it was very surprising and kind of fun to see her shout out in this book and feel like, oh, I'm only 2 degrees away from Lowell Tolhurst.
You
His
might
name is
be
Lawrence,
closer,
by the way.
Lawrence, that's right.
Lawrence.
Lawrence, yeah. So like I said, a fairly standard name, but goes by Lowell. And that's cool. But yeah, the Leo Bush shout out was a surprise, and he really went into how much he liked her research on how Goths handle aging and sort of digging into, is there something about Goth that lets us age more gracefully and stuff like that, which dovetails with her research and also with the interview we did with her on the episode several years ago. So I thought that was cool.
I was thinking about that the other day in reference to a Mark Maron joke where he's like, yeah, man, you can think about being an old rock star or something as you have all these like awesome outfits and everything, and you still got your old head on top. Cool boots. Old head though, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, man, What would it be like if we were all just nude all the time? Would we just see how gravity affects us all and be more accepting of a little punch? Or
It
would it
probably
still just be like, well,
wouldn't be.
you kept your looks in your face, but old belly, right?
I probably
I don't
wouldn't be anything.
I don't know. People are always shallow about something.
Oh,
Who
they
knows?
are, and I'm sure they will. Even if we're all naked, there'd be less of the hang up about nudity, obviously. But I'm sure there'll be things that people can complain about, like there always are.
Oh, you
Tattoos would
look-
probably become more common, though, both tattoos
Oh,
and
yeah.
piercing, because that's how do you adorn yourself without clothing? Well, you ink yourself or you stab metal through your portions of your anatomy.
Well, we're
I've
not
been to a
nudists.
nude-
I bet those are more common than we think.
Hmm.
I don't
Sorry,
know. I've
Ozzy.
been to a nude beach before, and people were pretty chill, and I didn't see a ton of body adornments.
Yeah. I mean, I've not been, I don't think I've been to a nude beach. I've been around nudists, and I've always been fascinated with nudists and would enjoy being in, visiting a nudist colony because I'm perfectly comfortable with that sort of existence.
Mhm.
And from the people I've seen, there are a lot of people who just look like normal people. They're
Yes.
not extra beautiful or extra ugly. They're just
hey,
people
you have a
in all
human
sorts
body.
of different styles. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are skinny people and there are fat people and they're all just sort of being themselves. And I think that's awesome. And I love that.
Yep.
Yeah.
As much variety in the body as there is in the face.
Yeah.
Old head, though, right?
Old head.
That's such a harsh take.
I don't know. I was just fascinated by like the concept of aging specifically in goth. Have this amazing brocade jacket. Old head, though.
You still got great eyebrows, so it's not too bad.
There you
Why,
go.
thank you.
Just
I-
play it off all Vincent Price style.
Mhm.
I've started trimming mine into points now that they grow
Oh.
wild like old man hair. It's
Yeah.
pretty great. The theater training has really helped me in my life.
You're a thespian?
I've been in a couple plays,
That's cool.
and I wrote and directed a one act about a guy who gets hit in the head and kind of comes to at a table being waited on by two women competing for his affections, trying to jog his memory because he's got amnesia. And it slowly emerges that he is a character in a soap opera, and they're trying to fill him in on like 5 decades of ridiculous plot twists. And he has an existential freak out. And then it's all a dream at the end because that was the most hackneyed ending I could come up with.
Of course. Discovering all these hidden depths with Ryan here.
It was called Soap Bubble.
Soap bubble. I see. I see I see what you did there.
Yeah, it's one of those things that was like, oh, I could do a novel where this guy like then leaves this setting and goes into a neighborhood where every house is a different style of sitcom. But I didn't get past a couple scripts.
Like the WandaVision neighborhood.
Yeah, a little bit. I've also seen other things that took ideas I would have used, like that Schmigadoon show. I was like, oh man, what if he went into a musical and really lost his mind? And then they did a whole show about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, well, I could still write a funny book about it, but I make music now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went to film school and acted, and it all connects to the whole performative aspect and creativity thing.
So you could be considered a triple threat, maybe.
Well, I can't sing and dance. I was a background extra because they forced me to on Hipster the Musical.
Mm-hmm.
And I warned them, I can't do the choreography. I can't learn it. You're springing this on me day of. Don't do it. And they edited almost every single shot of me out.
Yeah. I definitely, I can dance or I can sing, but doing them both at the same time doesn't seem to work for me. I was in a show choir briefly in junior high, which was fun, but I definitely preferred a standard choir where you didn't have to have choreo while you're also trying to sing.
Yeah. The best I can do is like melodramatic writhing and gesturing while I sing
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. But that's improv.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
can definitely do the whole thespian emoting with your gestures is very different than trying to remember a choreography while also trying to remember some lyrics and how to properly address a mic to make yourself heard.
My experience of it was it's kind of a holistic experience because I really, really do not ever want to have anything to do with a musical like that. I hate them and I can't dance and blah. But when I was on stage, the blocking became as
Mm.
much part of the expression and punctuation and everything else of the character as the lines and action
Okay.
and everything. So, and that's kind of because I have ADHD. That's kind of how I approach music. Is I can't just base it off one part of a song. I have to hear the whole thing formed and then holistically cue off various parts at different bits of the song.
Okay. So you kind of have to have a structure first before you can
Mhm.
fit the pieces together to actually have all the individual musical elements.
Yeah.
That's good.
I've
I'm
been-
sort of the opposite. Well, and that's just the opposite direction, but I find difficulty finishing songs because I start with sort of a musical idea that I start developing, and then I run into a dead end and I can't like move past something. So I've created a really cool loop, or not necessarily a loop, but a really cool sort of intro. I'm good at intros. And it just never develops into a song because I didn't have an end result in mind or a structure
yeah.
in mind. We'll see if I can do that because I'm shopping around now for a workstation keyboard that I can maybe just start recording things in a more holistic way. Because I find, doing stuff on the computer, there's just so many options that I reach into decision paralysis. There's just too many things that I can do, and I just can't muster the energy mentally to decide. So I just stop.
That's why I have bandmates to carry my worthless ass around.
That does help.
As he's
I've
looking
never
to write more.
really done collaborative music, so I don't know how to play with other people, which is another reason I wanted to get a keyboard with I was also looking at some of those what are considered cheesy arranger keyboards with the backing tracks that allow you to do the one-man band, but that would help me learn how to improvise playing with a quote-unquote band without actually needing to meet and interact with other people.
You could be the terror of the open mic night.
I could be.
He's back. No.
I'll be the nursing home goth.
I'm here to duel you to death.
Yes.
Yes. With my catchy tango track.
Indeed.
You're going to die. Good talk, y'all.
So we shall wrap this one up here. See what Danny can make of it.
I pity the fool. Everything moves towards its end. Except goth, because you just can't get rid of us weirdos.
Yes.
And scene.
We made it to the other side of the episode of Cemetery Comrades that we've been listening to. I hope you enjoyed it as I enjoyed it. I want to definitely thank Ryan, Azy, and Trae for putting this together, taking the work off my plate for a month. You truly did bring meaningful, substantive rest into my life. And of course, it's always a pleasure to enjoy the effervescent nerdery that emerges when you all get together. As I was listening, I couldn't help but think about the future of goth and what I might want to see or what might happen. I think you all were fairly hopeful about the future and hopeful for a continued blending and novel evolution of music like we saw through the 90s, and I'd say also the early 80s. I think it was a great point that was made at the start of the episode that these sort of innovations and explorations of sound and style that we saw in the 80s and 90s that we love so much today has not really been allowed to flourish quite as deeply as many of us want. Many of us, like I think Ryan said, many of us want something different, but when something different happens, we don't like it. On a similar note, as this was also brought up, I do think I'd actually recommend checking out the band Donzi, because they incorporate some of that Susie sound and Bauhaus dub in creative ways. And they say that they take influence from No Wave as well, which, of course, Lydia Lunch has said No Wave is user-unfriendly and dissident. And that as a genre label, when you hear someone say their band is No Wave, you really don't know what that is going to sound like, because every band sounds completely different. So that's the kind of thing that I've been enjoying recently, just as a recommendation. As to my outlook on goth, or for the future of goth, it's a bit more dramatic and maybe dour than what was shared, but I'm happy to be proven wrong, and I hope I am proven wrong, actually. Where do I want to go with this? Well, like Azy was saying, I've seen so many iterations of goth in my life that oftentimes I'm surprised where goth is going. I never thought that pastel goth and new goth would become a subcultural movement, which I think are good examples of what the kids were doing in our not too distant past, which was outside of the kind of 90s revival, although some of that was starting to percolate in there as well. In some ways, though, goth is predictable because goth tends to come in waves of revivals. The death rock revival, the 80s revival, the post-punk revival, the 90s revival, and I'm using the term revival incredibly loosely here. But it's not just predictable or rote or regurgitating the past. Goth is also creative and flexible and a creature that finds a way to survive against all odds. The synthpop and industrial craze, for example, in the early 2000s, which was when I was first getting into the club scene, was in part the result of a lack of spaces and goth bands and goth bodies willing to go out to clubs. So we gathered with rivet heads out of necessity and created something new. Right now, there is a 90s nostalgia sweeping the country. So I can imagine in 10 or 15 years that the 2000s and 2010s will be the go-to style corpse to drag out and put black lipstick on, which makes me shudder to think that cybergoth could become widely popular again, but I digress. I do think we will continue to see new sub-communities spring from the edges that, aren't goth, but if you kind of squint, they look goth, or at least they can be the subject of ridicule from proper goths. So stuff like dark academia or whimsigoth, for example. But in the short term, I honestly think it's been a long time since goth has ebbed. And historically, goth ebbs and flows. So this current popularity and expansion of community that we've enjoyed the last 5 years is amazing. But I can imagine with the high cost of living, right, with inflation, struggling to buy groceries, thankfully, the club scene has stayed mercifully affordable, but that kind of luxury may well be impacted. And with that paired with the prolonged popularity, I think we might start seeing clubs shut down again or events become more sparse. And, that's something that's happened in the past, at least in Chicago, but I think more broadly than that, where there was a big boom of subcultural spaces. People kind of took it for granted, and subcultural media in all forms. And then at some point that all dried up and disappeared. And I think the Gen Z group who got into goth, along with anyone who kind of jumped into exploring their identity during quarantine, will also see a culling. And I think that's natural for there to be a drop-off in members. People try new things, they get into something, they continue on with their lives, they change as people, they shift, they explore. And I think that means the current crop of kids that we see in the scene will start to shrink to some degree. And I'm just speaking historically, the scene does contract. The number of goths shrinks, and goth goes back underground like it did in the late 90s and early 2000s and like the 2010s, early 2010s. Of course, I think now is the time to be doubling down on community and supporting each other emotionally and materially, to organize and engage in activism even. Actually, that's probably another hope of mine for the future, that goth and goth music, or at least goths themselves, become more politically active. We have a network here that I think can be used to organize and create broader change. In the past, I've seen goths cluster around organizing for normalization of goth, right? So that you could get a job, so that you could go outside and not be the victim of violence, that kind of thing. And of course, some people also went the opposite direction and argued that goth should be unacceptable and transgressive. But I think that ship has sort of sailed, and both of those points of view could come together in an effort to create social and political change, fight for trans rights, fight for, become anti-racist, fight the sort of colonialism and genocide that we see happening. I think the music has certainly started to become more political in some degrees. There are, of course, people like Parma Ham and spaces like Wraith that are specifically meant to be transgressive and rebellious and shocking, and in relation to performance art, as it was with sort of, I think, always think of Christian Death and Ron Athey, but people like Parma Ham are also doing political commentary, like specifically around gender and sexuality, and they really are doing the devil's work, and I absolutely love it. So I think that's worth a mention as something that also should be talked about and explored, but perhaps is a bigger topic than for what I'm doing right now. And I just, for those who disagree, I'm not trying to advocate for goth as a vehicle for activism only. I think the exploration of the uncanny, of the existential, of mortality, of romance that is prevalent in goth is also meaningful, and in itself creates changes that expand out into the political domain, but in and of themselves are important and vital and core to what goth is. But all that to say, I do hope that goth does not go back underground. I'm sure there are people that wish it would. Of course, I've seen interviews from the 90s and 2000s of goths talking about the subculture going back underground and how that comes with benefits, like fewer imitators or less fast fashion, that kind of thing. But I honestly think with the integration of alternative style into broader culture at almost all levels, that goth has to sort of rediscover and decide what its identity is, I suppose. That's nothing new. As Trae said, goth has always and will always be dialectical, will be concerned with debating, discussing, pondering what goth is and what that means and what is and isn't goth. And that's important, and that's exciting and fun. and also tiring at times. So the eternal debate continues, and honestly, I do hope that Goth continues in the lineage of creative, bold, and I guess oblique ways of being and creating art. But with that, I guess it's time to wrap up this episode. Next month, as I've mentioned, is our yearly hiatus. So I will not be publishing an episode in January, but instead we'll be hosting a video hangout for all Patreon members. You're all eligible to join and chat with us. That will be scheduled soon. Patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. And I guess I could also just mention, if you did want to join Patreon, you can jump in at $1, and that gives you access to our Discord. So if you want to stay in touch that way until we return in February for a whole new year of Goth, that is an option. Thank you for spending your time with us, and until next we meet, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.
All right, you two and your juicy brains. What are we talking about?
Why don't we just maybe kind of discuss the place of Goth?
Did my
right
sound
now?
cut out?
No, I still hear you.
I hear you.
Are you hearing us? Or maybe it has now.
Cool. Azy.
If you can hear me, my sound is
Hey,
out.
there you are.
Yes, I hear you
Okay.
now.
Cool.
Are you hearing us?
Azy.
I'm coming.
Okay. We just
I didn't know if you could hear me, but I was trying to tell you my sound cut out because all I heard was all right, you two and your juicy, and then dead silence.
I'll
Fair
leave
enough.
it to you to fill in what I meant by that.
Here, let me see if my hub works.
I should probably pull up the chat function just in case.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Awesome. I switched over to my second hub because my first USB hub decided to just shit the bed.
Oh, good.
What timing?
Yeah, no, I was really confused because I'm like juicy, and then it felt like so much suspense.
I said you two and your juicy brains, and that was too much for the USB.
Clearly.
It was just like this is going into like not safe for work territory. We need to shut this down.
Big brother can't handle all the sexy.
What I miss.